Okay, so we are on module 4, and we are talking about sensory processing disorder, or SPD. Sensory processing disorder is not as well known. It is sometimes a standalone diagnosis. Actually, my first diagnosis was sensory processing disorder. But if you have a student with autism, just assume that they have sensory processing disorder. It might be an overstimulation, it might be an understimulation, and really the only way to know about that is to ask the parent or just ask the student if they're comfortable talking about it. It is often in ADHD as well, and ADHD, often they have understimulation, and these are the kids that are going to come in and they're going to slam the door and they're going to throw their iPad, and they're going to purposely be making noise because that's how they can connect with the world around them, is they need that overstimulation because they're neurologically they're understimulated, and so they have to create that. And then so that is your under stimulation are the ones that have to create it, and then your overstimulation, which is the most common with autism, is that they're just very sensitive to everything around them. So with sensory processing, I have a definition, also known as SPD. It was also known as sensory integration, which I think was my original diagnosis, but then they changed the name, of course, because they always change names. So it refers to a condition in the brain cells experience difficulty receiving or responding to information that is obtained through the senses. The way to understand sensory processing disorder is think of your 5 senses and then think of all of those 5 senses bombarding your brain all at the same time, and you cannot tune them out. So, example, you have a refrigerator in your house. Every so often your refrigerator kicks on, it hums for a while, it turns off. You don't hear that. If you have sensory processing disorder, you will hear every single time that fridge comes on. You can also hear, for example, in the schools where they have the air purifier that just sits there and hums all day long. Probably most of you don't even hear it anymore. Sensory processing disorder, you probably still hear it. Now, some students, I noticed that some of my students with autism enjoyed that as a white noise because it covered up other noises, but not all students will. So as I walk a mile in our shoes, this is the biggest thing that I say that sensory processing disorder is. Hangover. I personally have never had a hangover, but I've heard a lot about them. And it just feels like normal life, actually. But when you have a hangover, so everything is too loud, that's your auditory stimulation. Everything is too bright, that's your visual stimulation. You don't want the lights on, you don't want people to make noise, everything is too smelly, so, and that's your olfactory. You're just more heightened to your sense of smell is just more heightened. Everything makes you nauseous. Everything's too annoying, so that's like with touch. And back to your bandwidth, you can only tolerate so much. And maybe it's too risky to eat because you're nauseous. So a lot of times the auditory and the visual and the olfactory will create nausea. So you may have a kid who is constantly nauseous because that air purifier is humming, or because the lights are too bright, or because some kid next to them has a strong deodorant, or maybe didn't take a shower, so they have those smells. And things that most people can just tune out. You have something that you've seen too long, you just tune it out. With sensory processing, you cannot tune that out. So you are bombarded all the time with all these senses. Now, you can have low and high. So for me personally, I am high auditory, visual, olfactory. So noises, brightness, or it's not even brightness. It can be like lines that aren't straight. So if you're, or patterns that don't, something that doesn't follow a pattern, or really strong smells. And then and this is why kids with autism often are very picky eaters, because of the oral stimulation, where they don't like certain textures or they don't like certain tastes. They don't like to mix textures. And then you might be low or high. Like, for example, I can't tell the difference between a lot of different foods, which is fortunate for me because it makes me not as picky as I could be. But this is what these kids with the sensory issues, and many times if they have the autism diagnosis, they won't necessarily have or know that the sensory processing disorder is a diagnosis. It just kind of couples in. So just assume if kid has autism, most likely has sensory issues. And the only difference between that and hangover is you're an adult with a hangover, you made the choice. These kids don't make that choice, and it doesn't go away. So some common small irritations with sensory processing. Your brain doesn't turn off. It doesn't block out noises. For example, clock ticking, air purifying, mouse or the keyboard clicking. Those things your brain doesn't turn off, so you're hearing it every single time, and it doesn't tune them out. Non-pattern lines or shapes. I talked a little bit about that already. Smells, just other people. Touch, clothing, pencils, surfaces. So their clothing may bother them. Tags or seams. I was an adult before I started wearing socks and t-shirts and stuff not inside out. And the reason I switched is because I moved away from home. The place where I was living, they noticed that all my clothes were inside out, and so they were laughing at me, and so I flipped them around, and then eventually I just got used to it. Not used to it, but tolerated it. And then they came into like the tagless shirts and the socks that don't have the seam, probably invented by people with autism. But anyhow, so it might just be a pencil. The pencil doesn't feel right, and so they can't, you can't use it. Mixed textures, taste, and often kids with autism have a very small choice of foods. And kind of think of a toddler's palate, like they don't like a lot of things, they like a few things, and they just never outgrow that. And then once you have all these senses combined, it can create either a meltdown or a shutdown, which a lot of people think of a meltdown as like a tantrum, but this is they're physically unable to pull it together and stop that from happening. Or a shutdown where they just completely shut down, don't respond, don't talk, might just walk away. And it probably has nothing to do with you. There's just too much going on, and it just completely shuts their brain down.